And then Bernie poked all the photographers in the front row with his growing nose. His Medicare march included details on everything except how exactly you pay for it, because he doesn't have any of those plans. This comes as several of Bernie's campaign aides tell The Hill that the cranky commie is sagging in the polls because the media is blackballing him. Such filthy language. Is the media behind Bernie's socialism sell-off, or are Democrats just getting a little better at math? Let's meet tonight's panel and decide. She's an attorney and Independent Women's Forum senior policy analyst. Inez Stepman is here, along with Trump 2020 Advisory Board member and Ackman Ziff managing director Jason Meister, and Power the Future executive director. That sounds like a healing organization. It is Daniel Turner. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
These are very exciting times. Stuff is changing every day. The one thing is not changing, Bernie Sanders' poll numbers. Very static. It's interesting because as Joe Biden is going down, those voters aren't going to Bernie. Why is that?
Yeah, on the one hand, the Sanders campaign should be happy because he's maintaining. He's not losing, but he's also not growing. And so, as you said, as Biden is losing numbers, they're not going to him. And if you're the Sanders campaign manager at this point, you have to be a little concerned that you're not growing at all. He's got to start making up some ground, and he's not doing that.
So the president touched on something tonight, and this obviously really gets under Bernie Sanders' skin. And that is the idea that 2016 was his moment, and that moment has passed him by. Joe Biden suffers from the same thing. Bernie is blaming the media for his sagging polls. Is he right there? Because he did have establishment forces working against him in 2016. It's the same thing happening now.
He did. It's not quite the same dynamic, though. He was the outsider. We've already had that sort of outsider successful presidency with President Trump. But so I don't think that Sanders brings that element of an outsider anymore. I think he's old. He looks older than he was in 2016.
He doesn't look as old as Joe Biden.
But look, I think that what's more interesting about what's going on between Biden and Bernie today is that Obamacare was a failure. It was an experiment. It failed miserably. Premiums spiked, deductibles spiked, and
voices went down.
And now Bernie is putting this Medicare for all, which would go further in the direction. Yeah. It would destroy the middle class. You'd have tax hikes on the middle class to pay for all this.
There's no way you can do that without hiking taxes.
200 million Americans that get employer-based health care, private-based health care, would lose it. It's a nightmare, and he's just dragging all the other candidates to the left. So I think it's good for us.
It's interesting because the more plans we get, I feel like the less popular Bernie will become for different reasons, because the questions that people have about Joe Biden, they have a different set of questions about Bernie Sanders. Now, if you're one of these more moderate candidates like Amy Klobuchar or even John Delaney or John Hickenlooper, is there any way of capitalizing on the healthcare chaos?
Look, healthcare is an important issue for voters this election, and I think it's an issue where they don't really trust either party. In part, I think, because we've moved so far away from anything resembling a free market system in healthcare that we now have this kind of a hybrid monster where everyone's paying a lot to the private insurance companies, and there's no downward pressure on prices.
That's because it's all set on a government model. There's not enough free market here.
Exactly.
There's too much regulation, and putting more regulation on a system that's overregulated will make it completely implode. There's no other alternative.
Well, it is socialized. Medicare for all is socialized medicine. That's, the term they don't want to use for it. No, but absolutely, Bernie, I think he got his plans hijacked by the rest of the field, right? They're playing the same game that he was in 2016. They took all of his policies, and when it comes down to it, he's just not the most energetic character to then sell those policies if everybody else is saying the same thing. So
no, because they're figuring out, it's almost like Tiger Woods. Like they're figuring out a new way to play his game, and some of them are just playing it better.
So if you like your president, you can keep your president.
That's funny. All right, The Hill today reporting Democrats are fretting over the massive Trump cash machine and whether the eventual Democrat nominee will ever be able to catch up. Second quarter fundraising numbers are in. The Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee raising a combined $108 million. That's more than the top 5 Democrats combined. So should the left be worried about Trump's deep pockets? What do you think, Daniel?
I mean, that's a staggering amount of money. And I think not just comparing Trump to the other candidates in this cycle, but comparing Trump now to Trump 4 years ago when he was running, that means he's bringing in a whole slew of new people who are writing him small checks. Hillary outraised him and outspent him last cycle. So money clearly is not everything, because she still went down in flames. But Trump, from where he was 4 years ago, was bringing in a whole lot of small dollar donors, and that has to scare Tom Perez, the head of the DNC,
Yes.
something severe.
And, you know, if you make kind of a direct comparison and adjust it a little bit, you know, from 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when President Obama was kickstarting his reelection campaign, President Trump is raising more money. What does that say?
Look, that's right, and I think that it says that there's a grassroots here that's very strong. They're all small donors, and I think he's raising it off of all the things that you're seeing going on right now. The squad, okay, the radicalism that you saw on the debate stage last month. People are saying, how do we protect our families from those radicals?
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to write a check to the president and to his funds, because that's the only way to. He is the fire line between radical socialism and Americans.
Okay, so the president is actually improving with Republicans and pointed that out at the top of the show. He's actually gained some traction since his Sunday tweet that set off this new firestorm and with calls of racism. But he's not getting the same kind of support from moderate Democrats and independents. Are they still the key to this election?
Well, this is the same problem the Democrats are having, right? You excite the base by doing things that moderates and independents are not thrilled about.
And they have to run against that, especially in some of these congressional races. They really have to run against that in order to win.
Yeah, the squad is extremely, I can't say that without air quotes, the squad is extremely unpopular with moderates. President Trump's tweet is also unpopular with moderates. But what's really interesting, I think, about the numbers regarding his tweet around Republicans is almost half of Republicans actually expressed disfavorable opinions of the tweet itself.
That's right.
But they wouldn't then go ahead and say, President Trump is a racist. President Trump in general is. They don't like this particular tweet, but they're on to the sort of the game, right, where President Trump tweets something that is offensive to some Americans, and then the left kind of blows it vastly out of proportion. I think they're kind of on to this game, and so even though they don't like the tweet, they're not going to let it shake their support for the president.
And the squad loves that this is happening, because while we're all squabbling about this, they can not have to talk about health care for all, Medicaid for all. They don't have to talk about their radical socialist agenda.
What I think is actually interesting about the squad is that, if you look at their poll numbers, like Ilhan Omar's and AOC, you're 9%, 22%. They're not commensurate with how loud they are and how their voice is propelled across the nation.
Well, and I think that's the problem, because a lot of people in Democrat leadership are scared of them because they have these loud voices, but that's not the same thing as having broad support. And Nancy Pelosi is the only one who kind of realized that, but she's still very much in a political pickle. You guys, thank you so much. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Daniel, Jason, and Annette.